All you.
Take it away.
Take it away.
Okay. Well, thanks, Courtney. Yeah, so as Courtney mentioned, Luis Rosado I'm currently at Worcester State University in Massachusetts as an assistant professor. And what I'd like to do today is, like Courtney mentioned, present some results from my research study and a few other things. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started with that. So hopefully you can see the PowerPoint. Is that?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. So, right, I'll start by talking about the results of my study and how I've been using visible bodies, some new ways that I've been integrating it into my classes, and then some exciting future plans for using the software based on some grant funding that I just acquired. So, before I launch into the results, I think it's important to give a little bit of background about how we use visible body at Worcester State. And so these are the courses that we offer on our campus that currently use visible body. So these are probably familiar to most or all of you, the 2-semester A&P1, A&P2 schedule. Then we have a human biology course that is a full human systems course taught in 1 semester. And then the basic kinesiology course. Now, the basic kinesiology course is tailored to the occupational therapy students. So this is more sort of a deep dive to some of the joint by joint anatomy for the OT students. So those are the courses that are currently using visible body. And then we primarily use the Anatomy and Physiology app and the Human Anatomy Atlas app in our courses. The Anatomy and Physiology app, I always say, is like a digital lab manual. This is how I think of it. And then the Human Anatomy Atlas is kind of like, it is the 3D models that our students are using. The Physiology and Pathology app, I do use occasionally, especially the heart model, which is really cool. It has a beating heart model that goes into a lot of detail on the heart. And so I do bring that into my courses as well. During the last academic year, during the height of the pandemic, the way that we were using or teaching our classes were these blended class models. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the changes, the adaptations that we had to make for the pandemic. But the way that I used them was that our lecture component was online, that was synchronously online, and the lab component had a face-to-face portion. So I would split my labs into 2 groups, A and B, and on a week-by-week basis, Group A and Group B would switch being physically in the lab with me, while the other group would be zooming in remotely at the same time, so synchronously meeting with the in-person lab or in-person group in lab. And so then what I would do is split up after a short lecture portion, I would pair up my in-person students with remote students in what I was calling Zoom buddies, so little small groups of 2 to 3 students, and this is how they would work on the visible body content in sort of this group setting. And so it allowed for me to have students anchoring physically present in the room, their virtual group or Zoom buddies. So. And then the other courses use some variation of this split group model across the different classes. Now, at the end of the year, I was interested in knowing how useful the software was. And so I designed a study, and the title of my study is here. It's quite lengthy, but it's how effective is the visible body three-dimensional online platform for learning human anatomy? And really the question that I was asking was visible body any good? So did our students enjoy the software? Did they learn from the software? Was it effective in their learning of human anatomy? So I designed a questionnaire through Google Forms that looks like this, and I'm sure we're all very familiar by now with Google Forms. For the past year, they've been going around a lot. So it was approved by our institutional review board on campus. We had 37 respondents to the survey, and it was primarily based on this agreement Likert scale. And so this is pretty typical for these types of surveys, where you have a scale from strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree, etc. When I present my results, what I've done is I've grouped the agreement categories into this blue coloring. So both strongly agree and agree I'm showing as blue. And then in disagreement category, they'll be in purple. And then neutrals is kind of orangey color. Okay. I had these kind of general branches of questions. I call it dimensions of inquiry. So kind of what I was trying to get answers from. So the three in red, I'm going to be showing a bit more in detail. This one in purple, I'm going to be talking about towards the end, because it is on a slightly different scale. So I'll come back to that at the end. And on this fourth dimension of inquiry, I'm just going to compare it to Visible Body's own internal survey, which I think was quite interesting. And I'm sure Courtney will link with this video on YouTube. Okay, so what did we find? Well, what did I find out? So what we're seeing here are just some sample questions from the survey. These pie charts correspond with the individual questions on this table. So this first pie chart is the visual data for this first question, and so on. And so this dimension of inquiry is about how effective the software was and the overall information that was available. So the students had overall very high positive agreement, as you can see in this large blue section on the pie charts, for the majority of these responses. So they agreed that the visible body content was useful. So 84% of our students had that feeling from the software, and that it effectively supported their study of human anatomy. So almost 90% of the students agreed that visible body was effectively supporting their learning. And then another, was that it improved overall their knowledge of human anatomy, so 84%. So a large agreement in the positive from our students that visible body had overall good information, and it was effective for their learning. Now, I also was curious about the 3D graphics and the interface with the software. And so the students, by and large, agreed that the models had a lot of information, so that they were information rich, meaning that they had easy access to supplemental information. And if you've played with the Human Anatomy Atlas app, you know that additional information is only a click away, and you can access all these layers of information in the model. And so the students were able to see that. So 86% response on that. Now, we did have some slightly lower agreement with some of the specific details. Now, this issue came up throughout early on in the semesters with some of the rotation capabilities, the mouse pad tracking. So, you know, it was a little bit lower here in terms of manipulating the model on with like track pads and the 360 degrees. What I think is really nice is that Visible Body responded to these concerns very quickly and put out the keyboard shortcuts for manipulating the models from the keyboard. If the students were struggling with manipulating the model with a mouse, they could use the arrow keys to rotate the model, and then it's WASD to translate the model in up, down, left, and right. So yeah, anyway. And then another really strong result here that I see is that our students, almost 90% of them, agreed that they would recommend this software to others. So this is a pretty huge number in these types of surveys. And I'll come back to this because it also ties in nicely with Visible Body's internal survey. And so I'll come back to that in a second. So the last sort of big question that remained was, well, that's great, but how useful was it during the challenges of the global health pandemic during COVID? And so again, we see overall pretty large agreement that it was useful. Here, the online functionality of Visible Body was really good for the blended classroom. And then additionally, the 3D models were really effective in group learning and maintaining safe social distancing. So by using the software, we were able to maintain that safe feeling of keeping our distance from each other during the pandemic. Anyway. And then the students also agreed that they preferred using the software during the pandemic. So all in all, I think these results are all very impressive and in the positive in terms of how our students felt that the software helped with their learning during the past year. Now, Visible Body did their own internal polling and their own survey, very similar to similar questions. What I think is really compelling about their results is that they surveyed over 800 students here, and you can see that a lot of the results are, again, very much in the positive here. And what I think our data shows here is some support for what Visible Body found. So often when you see a company do their internal survey, you kind of try to take it with a grain of salt. But I think what we see is that, just from our students, there is really close agreement with this. This was the result from our students about recommending the software to others. So it kind of coincides nicely with what Visible Body is seeing in their internal polling. So I think that's all very cool. The last thing that I wanted to add here is that I think our results lend themselves in support of what Dr. Harley has been kind of recently putting out, is this idea of the visible body effect, which I think is a great catchy title and a true notion that our data support. And I recommend looking over her webinars. Cindy has, I think, a handful of webinars in the Visible Body YouTube library where she discusses the results from her own research, which are quite compelling, especially when in the area of drop, fail, withdrawal rates, so DFW rates. Her work has shown that Visible Body has this, I think it's between 10 or 15% decrease in this metric, and the number of students that drop these courses or fail or withdraw early from the courses. And she's also showing that her students are, more students are getting A's and B's, and less students are getting D's and F's in courses that are using visible bodies. So I highly recommend checking out her work. And yeah, so Cindy's great. So the last thing that I wanted to show here was that other dimension of inquiry. And what I'd like to point out front is that this is on a different scale. It's not the agreement scale. This was a comparison between the 3D computer models in visible body and the traditional physical models that we typically teach anatomy and physiology with, those muscle models, the disarticulated or the articulated skeletons in the labs. And then if the students found that there was no difference between the computer model and those traditional models. And so, again, fairly large agreement, but what I think is most compelling here is the difference between the computer models and the traditional models. So say for this first question here, so the question is asking which learning modality helped most in improving your knowledge of, here in this first question, sorry, the skeletal system. So learning bones, the landmarks of the bones, etc. And then we see that about almost 70% of the students agreed that these models were preferable to the traditional physical models. Same thing with the muscular system, learning the names of the muscles, origins, insertions, actions, those types of things. Again, around 67% agreed that the software was preferred. And then across all the macro anatomy, learning the large systems, digestive, respiratory system, all the macro anatomy, almost 78% of the students agreed that these computer models were in visible body were preferred to the traditional models. So I think these are really compelling results as well. Yeah, what else was I going to say here? I had something else I was going to say, and I forgot. I did want to mention that there was one caveat here, is that this result might be skewed a little bit in that during the pandemic, they were primarily using the 3D models. They had access to the physical models in lab, but around 83% of the students also responded that they primarily use the 3D computer models. So this might be a reflection of the circumstances of the pandemic, but I think still it shows that some compelling argument for the software. Okay, so I think I'll take a little break. I'm not sure if there have been any questions or if there are any questions.
Yeah, we actually have one. Oh, it went away. There it is. This is from Vlad. What percentage of students did not respond to the survey?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, it's definitely worth looking at, what the response rate was.
And we have one from Lawrence about setting up lab exams on visible body for the students.
Yeah, so
yeah, were you about to set up lab exams on it, or?
So hi, Lawrence and Vlad, both. Yeah, in terms of lab exams, I did have lab exams that were on the software, on the courseware, in the form of large quizzes that I pulled questions from. But if I think Lawrence might be asking about lab practical, station by station, timed practical type of exams. And the answer to that is no, but that is part of our future goals. So I'll talk about that in a second.
Sorry, I was muted. We also have a part 2 to Lauren's question, which is, could the lab exam grades be directly inputted into Blackboard?
So Lawrence, we currently have a light integration with Blackboard and Visible Body. And what that means is that when the course in Courseware is linked to the course in Blackboard, you can export your gradebook as a comma separated values file, CSV file, that is already pre-formatted for input directly into Blackboard, into the gradebook formatting of Blackboard. And what the light integration allows is that the username column in the exported gradebook is populated by the usernames for Blackboard. And so when you import the CSV file into Blackboard, it will automatically correspond with the students. You don't have to manually add that information as you would before the integration. So it helps with importing those grades into Blackboard. Yes, but it's a light integration. Other software that we use is a full integration where you can sync the grades automatically over into the gradebook. That is not the case currently.
Okay, and we have another one from Lawrence. Lawrence, you're on a roll. Were students expected to bring their laptops to lab, and what was the learning curve for new students to use Visible Body?
So yeah, students were expected to have laptops, and this was an expectation that was set out at the beginning of the semester in the syllabus in terms of required course materials. Worcester State has a laptop policy that any new or incoming transfer students are required to have a laptop when they join the campus. And they also have a laptop purchasing program where they help our students gain access to that technology. In terms of the learning curve, there is a little bit of a learning curve. This is something that I tried to use the first week. That's usually, in most cases, a sort of a blank week where it can all happen online, where the students are becoming familiar with the software by accomplishing a set of tasks that are not part of their grade, but are part of advancing to the next block. And I can show that in the courseware section in a few minutes here.
Awesome. I think that might be it for this portion of the presentation. So I think you're good to go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Lawrence, if you have more questions at the end, I'm happy to, we can chat about it more. But let's see. Okay, hopefully you guys can see the screen again.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, great. So I'm going to stay out of PowerPoint for a second. And what I'd like to show you now is some of the new ways that I've been kind of experimenting with Visible Body in the classroom, how I've been using it in the classroom. And what I'd like to, another talk on the YouTube library for Visible Body that I'd like to plug is Chris Scalisi's talk in December, where he was going over all the new content for the new update on the Human Anatomy Atlas after the 2021 update. And there's this really neat feature, the link function, that he talks about in this talk and that I've been sort of playing around with. And so that's what I have here. I have a list of these links that we're able to import into the software to pull out these models. So I'll just demonstrate how this looks. One of the issues that my students immediately found was they tried to open this on a web browser and it doesn't work. Yeah, the way you have to do this is you have to copy the link. And when you're in the Human Anatomy Atlas app, there's this little 2 chain link icon here. And what you do is you paste that link in here, and it takes you directly to that model that you've created that link for. And so if you recall, this is the image that I used to represent the AMP1 section earlier in the talk. And what you notice is that this is one of the muscle action models in the visible body, showing elbow flexion, which is a really neat feature in the Human Anatomy Atlas. You can scroll through these actions. You can select the prime movers of this action, gives you additional information, etc. So, but you can also, let's look at a different one here. If you add this particular link, you'll notice that now I have the model that I used to represent AMP2 at the beginning of the talk. And so here we have the cardiopulmonary system, and you could bring up this model directly by pasting that link. And some of the things that Chris goes over in that talk are how to navigate some of these extra features to sort of isolate the information that you want to talk about, or to add, delete, fade some of these features in a more efficient way. Some of these tabs that are, he talks about how they're in different positions now, but how to add different portions to the model, etc. So let's see, here's the full human system for human biology. So you can see how this quickly moves from model to model. You can, and incidentally, the way that you save these links is by using this share button here. And by clicking on that, you can access this share link feature. And it creates a link, one of those links, for the model that you've created. So you can have whatever level of detail model that you've been working on, and you've created a link now for it. You can copy that link, paste it on an assignment, paste it directly into Blackboard, however you want to, into an email to your students, and then they open that the same way that I've been opening the links, and then you can use that as instruction, or how I've used it, and I'll show that in a second, as an assignment. And then I'll just show you this last one here that I think is pretty neat. So here's a shoulder model that I might use for the OT students to explore all the different musculature. Incidentally, you can highlight, isolate individual muscles, and look at the origins and insertions of that individual muscle, as well as have the additional information related to that muscle in this little information tab here. So really high functionality. This is that additional information that I was referring to earlier, that it's very easy to click on any of these structures and access additional details, additional information and details about any of these structures in this single model, in the software. Where we know that some of the models, the physical models that we had in lab, they have all those little tiny numbers that, especially for the muscle models, that some of them are fading, some of the muscles are missing. The answer key or the legend is sometimes difficult to find. So this is a really beneficial part of these 3D models, is that the information is at the student's fingertips. Okay, so the new link function, that's really great. This is how I've kind of been using it. So let me share how I might use a link like this while teaching. So another really great feature in Visible Body is this save view and building these tours, what they call tours, and they're essentially little slideshows that go through that you build to have some kind of a lecture or instruction. So I might use this tool to go through all the large vessels that come from the heart chambers, and I might advance to the next slide where I talk about the major valves of the heart, the ED valves, the semi-lunar valves, and explore each of these individually, and then also spend a little time on the blood circulation of the heart itself, and all the major vessels that I want my students to be familiar with and know. Some more circulation here on the posterior view, and then inferior view here as well. And then lastly, I think I finished with the conduction system, so all the electrical conduction of the heart. And so this is a really functional way of utilizing the software, kind of an instructional lecture portion of a lab. Now, in terms of using this as an assignment, what I've actually tried to do, this is a little hilarious, but I asked my students to use this tool to then, if you notice, I added this notepad here that has the structures that I want my students to label. And so then they would go around and add labels for each of these structures, and then send me a link so they would share a link once they built all the fully tagged structure view for that assignment. So once they labeled all these structures in this page, they would share that view with me by sharing a link. And the same thing for each of these subsequent slides that I just showed. The problem that I ran into was that I thought I was being clever, and I deleted all the labels and I shared the link with them, and it retained all the labels. So they were like, well, what do you want us to label? It's already all labeled. And so what you have to do is you have to build two separate tours, one with fully labeled for instruction and one with all the labels deleted, and rename it and save it without the labels so that you can assign that as an assignment for the students. So this is one of the new ways that I've been kind of experimenting with implementing out of this app. Now, I've also been using what I call these quick reference guides for the occupational therapy students. And I'll just show what that looks like. So can you guys see the PDF? All right, so because these occupational therapy students are, they need to dive deep into the different joints of the body and really get a good handle on the anatomy, I structured that course on a joint by joint basis. So what I required my students to do is build these joint quick reference guides. So this is an example of the assignment of the shoulder joint quick reference guide. And essentially I would post this on a Google Drive as a Word document. It's basically an outline of what I want them to populate the quick reference guide with. You can see they need to add the primary blood supply, the nervous innervation of the muscles that are at the joint, the primary ones, and then individual images of all the muscles that are acting at in this case, the shoulder joint. The ligaments that are involved, the bursae, then additional the bones. I also have a section on the movements that occur at this joint and the range of motion and the prime movers for each of those motions. And then this last section is kind of a notes section that they can add and tidbits that they want to add for their quick reference guide. And so what this looks like at the end when they're finished is that they have they copy and paste these images from Visible Body directly. Some of them use the screen capture function. There is a way to download the images directly, and I'll just show that here real quick. Download image. It downloads a snapshot of what your view is currently onto a folder or somewhere on your computer. and then they would copy and paste that directly into the reference guide with all, at least the primary blood supply, the nerves that are involved at that shoulder, then the muscles, and then individual muscles with the information tab that showcases the origin, insertion, action, blood supply, innervation of each of these individual muscles. So this, back to Lawrence's question about the learning curve, this allows the students to get over that learning curve very quickly because they have to get their hands on with the software and manipulate the models, and I'm helping them learn these techniques for getting these really great guides that will help them in their careers, but also they're building essentially their study guide for the exam. So this is a way that I help them prepare for their exams as well. So you can see that the ligament section has all the ligaments labeled, the bursae of the shoulder, the bones here, and then the movements, the prime movers, and some additional information. So that's just another way that I've been using visible body. The OT students seem to really respond to that. They enjoy that part of using the software. Yeah, so. All right, are there any questions at this point?
Yes, we have one from Charles, who is a new visible body teacher. Yay! Can I attend an online VB course as a student to see a course presentation from the eyes of the student? Now, I do believe, and Christy Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a way that you can toggle between the instructor view and the student view, so you can see exactly what it is that your students can see.
Yes, you absolutely can do that. And then if you want to, even I know some instructors, I think Luis, I can't remember if you did this, but they create a student like test account too, if you really want to kind of go in even deeper, but.
Yeah, no, I haven't done that. Yeah, the student view is probably a good one. Visible Body also offers some really great training. Again, I highly stress checking out the YouTube videos. They have an extensive library there. I've also found that any of the presenters are more than happy to meet with you and chat with you. I've met with new VB users before to talk about how to get over that kind of learning hump, that little learning hurdle. And my biggest advice, I actually gave another talk earlier, my biggest advice is to just go in there and start playing around with the software. And I think Courtney says this a lot, where you can't break it. You just play
Yeah,
with it, with the software, click on all the buttons, and then you become more and more familiar with it. So.
And Charles, feel free to reach out, to your rep or just to our engagement team to set up as many trainings as you want. That's what they're there for. And they love it. So if you want, you could message me privately and just tell me your state, and I can make sure that you and your rep connect, and you can set up any kind of training as basic or as in-depth as you want, all for free. This is what we're here for. So
and like Luis had mentioned too, your rep can help you connect with any of the instructors who are featured on the webinars that are recorded on the YouTube channel. So that's also a great way to get ideas, share ideas with professors. We're also working to kind of put some things together to share as like a team here, so that we're constantly giving just ideas and sharing that kind of wealth of information. But we've definitely built like a community of instructors so that for that purpose, so that you can all kind of connect together and share ideas.
And
I see your question about using tours as quizzes. I'm going to address this in a second, and I think I know what you're getting at, and that's part of my future plan. So I'm going to get into that right now. Are there any other questions, or should I continue?
I think you can continue, and if more questions pop up, we'll just address them as they come.
And I just wanted to add one thing, if I could, for a second.
Yeah, sure.
The tour links, if you do open that, if a student or instructor, you open that on your mobile device, you actually can just click directly on it. Let's say you open Canvas or you're opening your email from your phone and you have Atlas on your phone already. If you click the link, it will automatically open up in the app.
Okay.
Yes.
So that is one difference between the mobile and web. So yeah, give that a try and let us know
great.
how it goes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, you can switch between the two. Mobile is easy because, once you just have the link, you just tap the link and it opens. Web is a little bit different. You have to copy and paste it in. But I do believe the team is working on cutting that out. So you should be able to just click the link and have it open. But
hyperlinks would be great. Yeah.
Yep.
It's on the list.
Always something to learn. Always new things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so can you guys see the screen again?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so yeah, in terms of future plans, at Worcester State, we are moving forward with using visible body in all of our OMP lab sections as a replacement for a physical lab manual. And again, another shout out or reference to the YouTube video library. Professor Pamela Silverman, she has a series of videos talking about this very thing, about how she has organized multiple lab sections using this template design. And I really recommend reviewing some of her material. And I've met with Pamela and I'm trying to do exactly what she did. So it seems to be really functional. And what that looks like, if you see over here in Courseware on my courses, I have built these templates that I'm still working on. I'm still tweaking them a little bit, but they will be templates for each of the A&P sections that each instructor will have, and will follow the same content from lab to lab. And so this is another great organizational kind of technique, and helping keep all the lab sections on the same content. I also wanted to mention that this new archive, my archive feature is great. Whoever came up with it, fantastic job. So it's a way to kind of archive the old courses that you have, and this is new, and I think it's great. But as you can see, I was using the old method of creating the Z archive name for the courses so that they would populate at the bottom of my list, but now I have these active courses that I'm working on in my main library. Okay, so for additional future plans is to utilize iPad stations. We just received approval for some grant funding to purchase iPads for our institution. So I submitted for some internal funding at Worcester State, and the university is supporting our efforts to provide these iPads for our students in order to be able to do some of this work that I'm going to propose here. So we're going to be ordering 12 iPads for our labs. And so the idea here is to use stations much like you would create stations in a lab around a model per se, or like if you created a station around an articulated skeleton with a list of things that the students would need to identify. You could do this with iPads as well. And so what I'm referring to here on the handout are the augmented reality handouts that Visible Body has created. These are exercises that, using the augmented reality function on the mobile app, they can scan this image here and it pulls up a model on the iPad or on the smart device, and they can interact with that model in AR like they would on a computer and go through this exercise, answering these questions at a station. And this is one of the ways that we're planning on using this moving forward. Now, and this best picture competition, this is may have also fallen in the new ways I'm using visible body. I have been experimenting with this already. And what you're seeing here are images of some of my OT graduate students that I taught earlier this summer, using the augmented reality function on the muscle actions to go through the range of motions of the different joints. And so what I did was I created these stations with, here we're going over the shoulder actions with a set of actions that they had to try to both get their participant or the person in front of them, their patient, to go through the range of motion on the list, and then also switch roles and be both the therapist and the patient, and work through the different actions using the augmented reality function. And then additionally, what I had them do is pause the video. If you remember, you could pause the action and try to recreate a picture by taking a screenshot of their mobile device of the overlaid model, augmented reality model, on the person, on the patient. And then, as you can see here, that try to closely match as much as possible the augmented reality model to the actual person. And then they would upload these to a Google Drive, and we would all vote on which was the best representation of that motion, action. And it was basically for bragging rights, and it was enough to really incentivize them to participate in this activity. And utilizing the new iPads, I think this is something that we can really dive deeper into with that section of the muscle actions using these stations. Now, obviously, in this class, the students were using their own devices. And what's really great about this new grant is that we'll be able to provide iPads for our students. Now, this last portion goes to Vlad's question about using tours for like quizzes and exams. And so here the idea is utilizing the annotate function in the software. So this is an image of what you can, write on the models and save the images, and again, create links for them. So I'll show what these links might look like. So that image that you were just looking at is a 3D model that has the information on the right lung, the lobes of the right lung here, labeled. So the idea would be for a lab practical station or quiz type station is to create one where the information is not there and the student is being assessed on their knowledge, and then they would have to respond. Maybe they're walking around with a sheet from station to station. They get to this iPad station where they see that the three questions that or the three structures that they need to identify are already labeled or pointed at by these arrows, and then they should identify the superior, middle, and inferior lobes of the right lung. So this is one of the ways that we're planning on using the iPads in the coming year. So, I mean, this is still a little bit in the works, but I think there's a lot of versatility in using these iPads for more kind of constructivist and group engagement of the content. So that's all I have on my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions at this point.
And if anybody does have any questions, now you can use the raise hand feature, and I can unmute you. and you can just ask your question directly. We've got about 4 minutes. We can stay as long as you want. I just wanted people to be cognizant of the time.
I have a quick question. That was a great presentation, Luis. I think I learned something new that you're doing every time that we talk, but that was
cool.
really a great way to like see it all too.
Yeah, the assignments are great.
Yeah. I like wrote them all down because I think it's great when people are asking like how for ideas. That's just an awesome way to be able to share it. For the lab practicals, how your plan, how closely does that kind of match like what the students would be already doing? Because I know a lot of professors I talk to, students are physically in a lab often anyways, like with a physical piece of paper. So they would be looking at a model that might have like stickers on them or something. So how closely does it match what you guys would have done before using Visible Body?
Yeah, so that's the challenge, right? I think lab practicals are how we've typically assessed students' knowledge in these type of classes. They've been, when I took A&P, I had a time station by station lab practical. I think there are some benefits to that kind of assessment, but I think I feel it's a little bit outdated, and it needs to be my goal is to try to enhance the lab practical a little bit. So it would match closely in terms of moving from station to station. So the idea is to have the physical models and have stations for that, or microscope slides, or whatever the station might be. And then also have iPad stations where the student can interact with the model. But now the issue there is, they could click on the structure, but this is a question for you guys. Is there a way to create a test mode for for the Human Anatomy Atlas app where they cannot access the structure information? The other way
really
to do
good
it,
feedback. Yeah.
So, and then also utilizing the quizzing function within Courseware to enhance the block assessment, so the summative assessment after each block that we typically use the lab practicals for. So, does that answer
thank you. I think, yeah, it definitely does. There's not a way right now to put Atlas into test mode, but I think that's a really great idea and a good example of how you'll use them in the actual lab with the app open. So we'll definitely take that to our team. We'll tell Chris.
Yeah, I'm also excited about the flashcard feature that's in the works, and I don't know if that's supposed to be in the kept under wraps, but I've had a chance to take a look at that, and I think it's great. I think there's some potential for using the flashcards for assessments as well. And I made that comment to the development team. But, yeah. And Vlad has a question about in that last long example, can it be graded automatically? And so in the example that I posted, it would be something that the student would write on a physical piece of paper as they're walking from station to station. So you would have to grade that as you would any lab practical like that with a physical paper. But I know that Visible Body has recently incorporated lab activities and this type of activity that automatically is graded. Christy Lynn, could you talk more about that?
Yeah, are you thinking of the auto-graded labs?
Yeah, those, yeah.
Yeah, so I actually have I have Atlas open somewhere here in Courseware. So we put the, what we did is we turned the lab activities into an graded assignment so that they will now be like a part of a graded quiz that would be in the quiz bank. So if you were looking now, the thing is, it wouldn't exactly be that same picture that we were looking at, Vlad, but the way it would look is something like this, where the students would take a a multiple choice quiz and a dissection quiz. You can have it set up where they're taking something as a pre-lab, then that's going to be automatically graded to just test their knowledge quickly. And then they take an in-lab activity here that is going to be similar with a dissection or multiple choice questions, and then that will automatically populate.
He can also create his own questions, within the quiz bank. So if you wanted students to find a specific structure, you could create a dissection quiz question that would say, select this, the inferior lobe of the lung, and they would have to select it in order to get it right.
Yeah, I can share.
Yep.
I can show some of the questions I've created.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, you can get really specific and or not. Let's see. Did I move? Was it? Oh no, that's right. Oh, sorry. So yeah, for the quizzing function, I'm just going to maximize the screen. So what you notice here is that I've already been building a nice library of my own built quizzes. And what's really good about this kind of filter by bar up here is that you can narrow down the quizzes. So I can actually, glad I see you here actually, I can select the author of the quiz, and here are the quizzes that I've written. I can also filter or search for the Anatomy and Physiology 1, BI 161 quizzes specifically. I'm already building these pre-lab quizzes here, and these are all going to be populated into my templates. So I also build these very large exams that draw pooled questions out of the draw questions, a set number of questions from the pool of questions. And then in terms of creating questions themselves in the quiz bank, you could do the same thing. You can search by author, you can create your own question, you can clone. So like, for example, here's a pretty specific question that I asked my BI 271 students in the unit 9 and 10, knee, ankle, foot joint. I also added this into the exam. So, this is a very high level, very detailed question. Select the plantar flexor of the ankle that originates on the posterior surface of the head and upper third of the fibular shaft and inserts on the posterior surface of the calcaneus via the Achilles tendon. So this is a question that I made. And so you can create very specific questions, very basic, very complex questions if you want. And you can also filter them by the question type, the topic that you're covering, etc. So, and then the way to create, I don't know if you want me to, maybe we don't have time to go over how to create a question, but it's pretty straightforward. You create the question type, then you have to pick a view. If you're creating a dissection question, if you want to pick a view, you can select, say, the arm. And then what's really cool about this is that you can search here and say you want to look up the biceps brachii, and then you can see in the search, you can select all the structures that will fulfill the question that you're going to create. So let's see, biceps brachii, short head on the left arm, and you want to add the right arm as well. And then these are all the acceptable answers or structures that the student can click on. And then you create your question. Okay, what is the primary elbow flexor, or select a primary elbow flexor or something like that. That's a pretty straightforward question that you just created. Or if you wanted to get really specific, then you could say you create the whole, what is the origin and insertion or the biceps break, you know, that kind of question. That's what you would add here. Okay. Then you have to give it some topic, subtopic classification. This helps you with the searching for the questions, and keywords are also really good for creating easily searchable questions. Then you've created a question. It's really as easy as that. In the quiz bank, you can create a quiz from scratch like that as well, or you can clone a quiz. And this is what I often do, is I'll find a quiz that is pretty close, and I'll just clone it and call it, you know, something specific. I try to use very specific naming nomenclature so that it's easy to search and easy to populate into my courses. But let's just say this is test, test, test. Okay. When I create that clone, it populates it to the top. Then I can edit that clone and delete questions that are not part of the quiz, or add more questions. And when you add more questions, if you've gone through and created a list of your own questions, you can search by your author, and the most recent questions that you've made will be at the top. So if you're, you know, wanting to create a very specific quiz or exam, and you're wanting to create specific questions based on the material that you covered yourself in lab or you emphasized, you create the questions first and you populate your library of questions, so that when you go to create the quiz, all those are at the top of the library. You can select them all and then create your quiz that way, or exam. That was a bit fast. I'm sorry about that, but
No, I thought that was an excellent crash course for any newbies.
Yeah, and like Courtney said, we will go, we can definitely go through that with you, very detailed in a personal training session. So we're definitely happy to help pick up all the tips and tricks. And
I would encourage, you know, anyone, whether you're, you know, a new user or, you know, you're a pro, to, you know, make use of our support site. We have a very comprehensive support site that, you know, walks through tips, tricks, and just the basics of pretty much anything that you can do with our products. And I'll actually link to that in tomorrow's email as well. So, do we have any other questions? I know we're a little bit over time, but I think it was helpful to go over time. I think having Louise show us, you know, how you actually, you know, create these quizzes and quiz questions was pretty helpful. So
I'm getting pretty fancy with my using Visible Body. I did forget to cover one thing. I don't know if you want me to do that now, or should we end? Lawrence's question about the learning curve, and I forgot to touch on that. I can.
I'm happy to stay on too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in these templates, the Start Here module, this is the first folder that I have students work through. Now, Visible Body has a whole set of resources for students on their website on how to use the software, how to register for the courseware. This will be a little bit different if you have integration with your LMS, but there are, in the Start Here module, that first week that students are coming to Blackboard, and I have all this information linked up from Blackboard, and they're starting to register for different, you know, online components. They would spend time in this first module, the Start Here module. They take a practice assignment. There's a practice assignment, a set of instructions on how to, you know, a very detailed set of instructions. This is meant to help them get over that learning curve, feeling a little bit comfortable opening models, playing around with them a little bit. And then there's a practice quiz. This gives them an ability to practice the quizzing. And so they get a sense of how the information is organized, what they're going to see, what they're going to expect when they get into the actual lab by lab folders. And then the way that I've organized these folders is very like kind of a repeat, so that the students gets really familiar with how these are all laid out. We're starting with a pre-lab graded quiz. This is a low stakes 1 or 2 points quiz that they need to take before they come to lab, so that they prime for whatever that content is that week. Then they have the reading components. What I call active reading modules are in the anatomy and physiology app, using those 3D models to explore the content for that week. And then some additional resources. Then they have an in-class assignment, several assignments that they should accomplish while they're in class, and then a graded quiz that is kind of a higher stakes quiz for the lab unit that they just covered. And this would be up for a week for them to take whenever they're ready to take it. I typically give multiple attempts. This is something that you can set up here. I give 2 attempts and they can keep their best attempt. I give them a few minutes, 15 minutes to take the quiz. I want them to really work on being prepared for these quizzes before they start them. So 15 minutes is more than enough, but it gives them that drive to prep before they start the quiz. So anyway, that I just went into more, and I could keep talking about this for another hour.